So most organizations discover that the larger cost is extracting and validating data. This is where you'll see the biggest ROI. What we're going to show you today is the Nimbello AP software suite, where we're collecting, digitizing, processing, routing those invoices, and then obviously doing an integration with your system. We have seen a lot of success within the PLEX community and also the SyteLine community. However, we aren't just tied to those two ERP systems. We've actually integrated with about 30 different ERPs with Nimbello through the years. So, how Nimbello helps? We help in many different ways. And I'll let you read the slide. I'm not going to bore you with reading this slide. But if we were in a room today and we were face to face, and I could say to you, can your current AP process scale without adding any headcount? How many people could tell me yes or no? Can you tell me how many invoices are sitting in someone's inbox right now, waiting for approval? Has anybody ever made a late payment to a strategic supplier? Have you made a duplicate payment? How confident are you that every invoice is coded correctly? And how much visibility do you have into invoices that are approaching due dates? So all of those kind of cover all of those reasons, and you may be a sliding scale across those reasons of how Nimbello can help you as a company. So Customer Spotlight, talk a little bit about Elwood. Elwood has been with Nimbello for around 3 years. They process a good amount of invoices per year, over 100,000 invoices. Started out with much smaller number of sites, but they are now up to 14 sites. We really focused on their AP process, both PO and non-PO invoices. And they've seen, great results and are extremely happy with coming on board with Nimbello and using the system. So built for Plex and built for SyteLine and other ERPs, we offer you the ability to collect and digitize your data through an AP inbox, which is your invoice collection, digitizing those invoices, your PO item pairing and matching, routing and approvals, and then that two-way integration with the ERP. You're going to get, once the system goes through, is up and running, you're going to see some really great invoice accuracy as well as any variance captures within the system. And with that said, Justin, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you to go ahead and jump into the demo.
All right, thank you so much. Hi, everyone. I see a couple of familiar faces out there in the attendees. I think we may have done some projects together, so that's kind of cool to see. Share my screen here. So what I want to go over today is just kind of a brief site tour, some things you can expect from when you're inside the workflow, how the workflow kind of works, and then of course at the end some Q&A. So what I'm sharing here today, this is just kind of our demo site. We got some demo data loaded in there, and this is kind of the first thing that you're going to see upon logging in, right? You, your staff, anybody who might interact with Nimbello, you're going to log in, you're going to come to what we call the My Task page here. So really one of the strengths of Nimbello is, the ability to track invoices, right? Track those invoices so you can get them in the correct place that they need to be so that the payments are accurate and correct. And we do that, a bunch of different ways, right? We receive the data from your ERP on a regular basis, right? We're getting your updated vendors if they've changed, any POs that have changed. When you guys get receipts in the warehouse and you update the system, we get that data as well. So whenever an invoice stops for whatever reason, we try and be as touchless as we can. It's kind of one of our hallmarks is that we try and be as touchless as we can with those invoices. In a perfect world, if everything lines up, boom, it comes into the system, it gets tracked, we attach the receipts to it, we send those over to the ERP, and it creates that voucher for you guys to pay. But if for whatever reason there's something off with that invoice, based on your guys' setup, every client's a little bit different. Some have a freight tolerance, some don't. They want to see everything, right? But based on those tolerances, we're going to stop those invoices and we're going to try and intelligently direct them to the people who may be responsible for fixing that issue. And you're going to see those kinds of things here on the demo screen. So, for example, everybody's going to log in and they may have a few less boxes than I do here. I'm on an admin account, and it's all security based. Right. So if you're just a non-PO approver, you might just see the non-PO queue and a few other ones, right? If you're more of an AP specialist and you're handling a lot, you're going to see more boxes. But each one of these rows here, it kind of gives you an indicator of like, for example, my directed to task. This is probably the most important one for both an AP specialist, a buyer, whoever's interacting with the system. These are invoices that have come in and we have identified some sort of issue that they need to correct. Maybe it needs geocoding. Maybe it's in your queue for approval. Maybe there's some sort of price variance on purchase order invoice and you're the responsible party to fix that, right? So that's probably our primary one that customers like to view immediately. We got a few different ones here. Again, depending on your security, you may see more, right? If you have certain vendors marked as priority vendors, it's going to show those there first. So you may have, let's say, 10 items in yours, and there might be 150 PO invoices out there. But you have marked 5 specific vendors that you might say, hey, I want to look at these immediately, right? These are some top priority vendors for us. Maybe they're on shaky ground for whatever reason, or you just want to get them paid immediately. Now you can separate those out. Lately, we've added multi-PO as part of the product, so that so a lot of companies, they want one purchase order to one invoice. It's very common, but sometimes you get maybe a discount from the vendor. Maybe it might be fairly if they can have multiple POs on one invoice, right? That might be something to explore. So we can have a separate area to review those. We have our non-PO invoices. Those are pretty standard again. And we have a few different other ones, right? Portal invoice verification. And really, again, a lot of things on here are they're only going to land there if there's some sort of issue or something that you want to check out based on the settings of the site when you go through implementation. Again, as like a super user AP specialist, you're going to see a whole lot more. You're going to see, okay, ready export. This is our favorite one. Once everything is completed on invoice, whether automatically via the system or somebody got in there and had to do something, that moves it over ready to export, and that means it's going to go out to the ERP, create that voucher, and go ahead and get it paid. Again, this screen is kind of your one-stop shop to getting things done on Nimbello. So let's look through a few more of these though. You can see up at the top here, we've got setup, transactions. Transactions are probably going to be we spend a decent amount of time here. But in setup, let's go through like non-PO first. We'll open this up here, and our big one here is approval groups, right? Nimbello has the ability to have approval groups for those non-POs, right? You may say, okay, we're going to get a non-PO invoice, and it's for freight, right? And depending on the size of your business, you may have just one group. It's only going to be these 3 people, and maybe you're a larger client. You're going to have, well, we have freight for Ohio, and freight for Michigan, and freight for Salem. You can have all sorts of different categories depending on where the invoice came from, who needs to look at it, all sorts of things. So, but we kind of have a grid. We got a couple different ways to do this. You could do it through what we call limited, and that's based on the dollar amount of that invoice. So if you get a freight invoice, these are just some default ones I have here, 100, 500 bucks, 1,000, and so on. But you can set these to whatever amounts you like. And you could say, okay, well, we want maybe Steph Harper here, right? They're going to review and geocode that invoice no matter the dollar amount, right? And this could be one person. You could set this up as a group. Maybe you have your AP specialist. Sometimes they'll have somebody in the group, right? That freight group. They may have them geocode it, but a lot of times people in those approval groups, they may not know all the geocodes. And so you may want somebody in AP to do that for them. So it's pretty flexible in how you want these groups to be set up. And then as they approve, geocode and approve, it's going to go down this line and it's essentially going to keep going until it finds somebody who has a high enough approval to give the final approval on that non-PO invoice. So that's kind of our limited one. We also have ordered, which is essentially, but it's much like limited that it's going to go into an approval group. First person is going to be responsible for geocoding and approving. But unlike limited, it's not based on dollar amount, right? We're only looking at maybe your page number. It needs to go through every person's page or doesn't matter the dollar amount, or maybe it's finance, IT, or something like that. So you might, get a big shipment in something from IT, and you go to an order group, and it's going to go through person 1, 2, 3, 4 every time. Doesn't matter the approval. It's got to see these individuals. And there's a few other ways to do approval groups. So those are really the main two that we see most often in manufacturing and higher ed and some medical clients and stuff like that. So non-PO is fairly robust. You can set default approval groups for vendors. That's a big automation, right? If you got vendors, freight obviously is a big one. But your utility bills and stuff like that, your water company's paying a charge. So you get the same approval group. We see that's for the you can go into that vendor inside Nimbello. You can say, hey, this is our default approval group. Nobody's even going to have to see it, right? There's also automation behind the setting of approval groups based on the last three invoices, right? If we got three invoices that have come in from the same vendor and they got given the same approval group every time, we're going to remember that. It's going to start applying that moving forward. It's going to keep doing that until somebody changes it and resets that count. So there's a bunch of different automations in place to help speed it up for both you and your staff. For instance, less touch involved, right? Because we're trying to aim for as touchless as we can. So let's go back to that's primarily what you might do in setup. Transactions. We got a lot of cool stuff in here. So a big one is search invoice. So I know a lot of problems that clients encounter before they move to Nimbello is that it's really difficult to track down invoices and track down where something is. Some clients are still using paper and filing cabinets, and it's a pain to go find those invoices. Or a lot of it is managed out of your email inbox, right? It gets sent to person A and B, and maybe they give their sign off, and they're like, who still has that right now? I need this vendor paid. So one of the great things about Nimbello here is the search invoice page, and it's very robust. There's lots of ways you can search, right? And because we're digitizing all this data, you know, it's so easy to say, I want to see all, invoices for this specific vendor number through a certain date range or whatever you want to look at and pull that giant list up. And it can give you tons of information about those invoices. So, for example, if I'm just going to blank search here, it's going to pull up a list. This is, depending on how many invoices you get, it might be a large list. We're in the demo site, so not a whole lot. Um, it's going to pull up a giant list of, all the invoices of the search criteria that you wanted to. And it's going to give you tons of information about those. So it's going to give you the vendor number, vendor name, invoice number, and some of this data comes from the invoice, and some of it might come from the ERP. It really just depends on your guys' setup. Some companies use DBA, so, right? If there's no PO number, pretty good. It's a non-PO. Totals, import date, when did it come into the site? Has it exported this and went to your ERP, right? We're trying to give you as much data as we can. Who's the current direct to, right? If it's sitting and it hasn't made it to the ERP yet, who's it sitting with that they need to take some sort of action on, right? We can see what status is it in. Is it in a hold for non-PO, PO? We can see we have one in ready to export here, all sorts of information. Since last action, this is a pretty nice one, right? When's the last time somebody touched that invoice to do something on? Now, we have a payments module, so some of that payment information might be there as well, right? Has there been a payment issued? It might go from posted to paid, depending on you received from the ERP. Division functionality. This is something that some clients use, some don't. I feel like it's kind of pertinent to talk about because it kind of changes the way your site looks like. We'll talk about division here in a minute. But that's an important one, right? You may have just one location and you use Nimbello for that. You may have lots of locations and the data might be different. And the users between those divisions, plants, or however you want to kind of frame it, may be different. And so the security of the site works differently, right? You may have a plant in Ohio and they're going to do, PO code or non-PO coding and PO invoices, and you want them just to see stuff from their plant, their division. AP specialists may have a broader view, right? But it's going to give you some information about where that is. In our source, this could be OCR, it could be EDI is another one, CXML. There's a ton of different ways to get that invoice into the site. So I'll give you that information. We have a view invoice image there, just quick image of whatever that invoice was. Just want to quickly look at. And then details. We're going to go into the details of one of these.
Hey, Justin, we had a quick question too on there. Someone
Sure.
had asked, is there a way to see the hold reason when using the search invoice function?
There is probably a column. It might not be in there. There's also the easy page search. This is another good one to do a blank one because I think the hold reason's here as well. So for example, you might be able to see notes. This is a slightly different one. The invoice search and easy page are a little bit different, but this is a good one here. So you can see the notes on here. So for example, this invoice came in and the purchase order didn't exist in the data. And so it's going to stop and say, hey, PO number, it's not found for whatever PO number. This one was price variance. This one had to do with receiving multiple quantity match found. And it's letting you know, hey, there's multiple here. We don't know which one to take. You might need to come tell us which one to take. So there is a way. It's in a slightly different search though. And I think it is another column that can be added to search invoice. It might just be disabled in the demo site here. So good question. All right. So we'll go back to one of those invoice details, but just to also show that on the My Task page, there's a bunch of view buttons over here and it'll take you into those queues. So if I click view on this, it's going to show me all the purchase order invoices that have stopped in the workflow for some particular reason. And like the easy page as well, it's going to tell you that hold reason right in here. So whenever you go into that queue, it's immediately going to tell you. You can see this one again, no receipts, multiple quantity match. There's an additional charge of freight on here that needs to be reviewed. No receipts. It'll give you an idea of that also as you go into these queues to work on. So your My Directed To tasks, AP review, all sorts of things. So let's go into this air gas. It's pretty common over here. Sometimes a couple lines, sometimes a lot of lines. So here we are in the invoice details page. I would say this is, aside from the My Tasks, you'll probably be in here the most, other than that. And this is where we're going to display the details of whatever invoice you went into. So at the top, we have a whole bunch of buttons, right? If you made a change to the header, maybe you want to say, oh, this is actually, maybe it came in with no division, the PO wasn't found, all sorts of things. Oh, this is actually for location 2. Click Save Header Changes. We can see we have vendor information kind of on the right here. If you need to change that vendor pay site, it just depends on the ERP. You have the ability to change it here. And again, all this is security control. So you can say, my super users, my AP admins, they're going to be able to come in here. They're going to be able to edit the invoice number, the PO number, whatever they need to be. But maybe you don't want the buyer to have that much power. You want just the buyer to be able to maybe change the PO number or just maybe division or something like that. That's absolutely possible. It's as controlled as you want the environment to be. You just have to let us know. We also have some other buttons in here. Again, our view invoice image. And we also have an inline image viewer here you can see. But this is if you have multiple monitors. Sometimes when you're working on an invoice, especially one with a ton of lines, sometimes it's handy to move that over to another monitor so you can kind of go between the two and compare. Again, there's the inline image viewer. And again, this is just something handy, depending on your monitor size. You can zoom in and stuff like that if you want to do one. You also have a change in an IP or PO button depending on the invoice type. Sometimes it gets sent in the wrong line. Somebody scans it in the OCR or something of that nature, and it'll just swap. We have an open edit save changes, and this is a large button now. If I click on this with administrator, it's going to open up a whole bunch of things, right? Invoice number. It's going to allow me to change all sorts of stuff here. And like cancel. We don't want to save anything. So going down a little bit, we have this section here, right? We have our total of our invoice, our subtotal, self-assessed tax. Not a lot of people use this, but it's something we kind of have. And our comment log. A ton of information is going to be in this comment log. So as soon as the invoice hits Nimbello, right, it gets ran through our OCR, whether we do that or you do that. We can talk a little bit about the OCR in a few. As soon as it comes into the workflow, it's going to start time and date stamping everything that happened on that invoice. System did something, if a user did something, you can just simply leave a comment on here, either to a person specifically, or to just know, let's say, let's say Hank client here. I want to comment, I'm coming into this invoice, I'm looking at it. Maybe I don't have the power to change the invoice number, but I noticed that something in the OCR may have got it. I look at the invoice, there's some sort of mismatch here. I can comment to Hank, who is an AP admin, who does have this care, and say, hey, I noticed the invoice number wrong. Can you fix this, right? If you click email, save comment, it's both going to place a comment down in our comment log, but it's also going to send an email, whatever email address is assigned to Hank McLean here in the site, so that they can come in, they can get the notification to come in, right? So we have our comment too. If you don't want to leave an email to anybody, you just want to leave a comment in the log. Maybe, for future people who look at this invoice, you may put in here, you know, reached out to the letter on 6/17, about whatever, awaiting response. And you can leave that note in there for somebody else to see. So somebody, AP admin or whoever wants to come in there, hey, why isn't this moved? They can read your comment and be like, oh, okay, we're awaiting a vendor response. Or maybe they can follow up with that vendor as well. So there's a bunch of different ways you can use the comment too. Our direct to, which is kind of next to that, this is unlike comment. Well, I should say it's similar to comment, right? You can actually, if we see up here in the header, we can see who this is currently directed to. So at this moment, for price variance, we are directing this invoice to Cooper Howard. They might reach out to the vendor for a different price. They may update that price inside the ERP so that's no longer in that price variance tolerance, right? It's up to the client how they want to fix these issues. But we can see it's in Cooper's directed to. So when he logs in, that's in his my directed to tasks. So we can see that it's directed to him. He can come in here and he can manually direct it to another person if he wants to say, hey, this is actually not a price variance. This is some sort of mistake or whatever. Um, and like the comment too, he can put a response, a comment in here, and when he hits even save comment, it's also, in addition to leaving the comment, it's going to change that directed to another person so that they can see it in their queue and do whatever work they need to on it. So again, there's lots of information in here, and this is a great way to keep track of an invoice to see who did what, when did they do it, how long has there been between, back and forth on this invoice. So we can see, for example, this originally came in, 6/19 of 2025. It's about a year now on the demo site. We can see that, there was a price variance. Somebody de-invoiced it on here. Then it got held for an additional charge of tax, right? And then there was price variance and it got overridden. Yeah, we mess with this one a lot because it's on the demo site, but you can see every action on here was taken. We can see who the workflow action was by. We can see who it was directed to after. There was an email to in here, right? Somebody left a comment or whatever. It would tell us who that user is and our status after the action was taken. So, a lot of information in there. Let's scroll down a little bit though. Head on, let's start from the bottom, right? We have our previous and next buttons. This will just take you back and forth between invoices and whatever queue you pulled up. So if you ran a search invoice, you have 5,000 in there. If you enter one, you're in a queue of 5,000. You'll go back and forth between that. If you opened your My Directed To tasks and you had, let's say 10 in there, you click view on one. Well, you're only going to cycle through that 10, right? So it's just a quick way instead of, going back and back in the queue and so on to cycle through those. We have additional documents here. This is going to contain our original invoice image. You can click view on that. But if you wanted to upload supporting documentation, maybe you have an invoice in there and you want to upload a bill of lading or